Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our 8th Sharing Leading practice event of the academic year. For those of you who have not attended a Sharing Leading practice event before, they were formerly known as our Leadership Development Days, where schools with an accredited area of excellence get to share their best practice. We are very excited to have Dan Ingham, leading practitioner of the Fetch Me a Pen project, with us today. Mulberry School for Girls is part of our East London hub. Now, before I hand over to Dan, who will be talking about the Fetch Me a Pen project, which was, I believe, established in 2013 to improve secondary teacher and student knowledge around academic literacy with a particular focus on writing, I just wanted to go over some of our housekeeping rules. So thank you to those of you who have already introduced yourself in the chat function. If you haven't done so already, please do so by saying what school you are from and if there is anything you'd particularly like to get out of the session. There will be time throughout the presentation for questions. And I believe Dan will have some time at the end as well for further questions. Please do put any thoughts or comments in the chat for the wider group as we go along. If you could please remain muted during the presentation as it prevents any background noise, that would be greatly appreciated. If you do want to unmute yourself, however, just hover over the little microphone icon in the bottom left-hand corner. I also suggest putting your screens on speaker view, which is found in the top right-hand corner if you haven't done so already. Now, towards the end of the session, I'll be posting a link to our feedback form, which would be great if you could please complete it. Feedback is really valuable to us and helps guide our future events. Finally, this session is being recorded, so if you do not want to feature, please do let me know. I'm going to now stop sharing my screen and hand over to Dan. Thank you so much, Dan, for leading today's session.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yes, we've got some thumbs up and some nodding, or it feels like I should say good evening, judging by the quality of the light outside. I hope everybody's well and coping in the current situation. Thanks for joining us. It's great to see so many of you here. Any sort of technical glitches or hesitations will be owing to the fact that this is the first time I've done something for Fetch Me a Pen via Zoom, so please bear with me. Just having a look at the chat, we've got people from various parts of the country, which is great, and we've also got people in a number of roles, and at this stage I'd like to sort of share this pictorial metaphor with you that went on our website when it was designed and went live several years ago now. And I think we're interested in people who are at any stage of their kind of journey into embedding academic literacy and having a real focus on academic writing in their schools. It might be that you're getting started, you're a classroom teacher and you want to better embed academic literacy in your lessons, or you might be at the stage where you're looking for a departmental approach or engaging the whole school, so kind of sort of making your way into the forest, or the stage we're at, although we're at all the other stages too, and that's sharing expertise between schools, because the Fetch Me a Pen project was a cross-school project. So I'm hoping that what I'm going to present to you today is going to cater for whatever stage you're at in some way. So I'm, the aims of the session, I want to talk you through the journey of the project. As Rebecca said, it was established in 2013, but there was a journey before that. That was kind of midway through the journey, really. hopefully share some principles and strategies around language literacy, writing, and how we improve teacher and student knowledge, skills, confidence, and practice. And then hopefully you'll be thinking about how you might begin to take similar approaches in your classrooms, in your subject areas, and across your whole schools. So please do ask any questions. If you want to unmute and ask me a question, or you want to put a question in the chat box that Challenge partners are keeping their eye on for me. The questions are quite repetitive, the questions here on our agenda, but essentially they kind of boil down to, is this relevant or required in my context, and how might we do this? How might we go about doing something similar to the things I'm telling you about today? Okay, so I'm going to go into this in a bit more detail later, but the Fetch Me a Pen project was funded by the London Schools Excellence Fund. So we have the Mayor of London's munificence to thank for that, a guy called Boris Johnson. I'm not sure what's happened to him. I'm just going to play you a promo video. This is from 2015, and happily I don't appear in it because I was on paternity leave when the film crew came in. I watched this earlier, and it was really, really kind of nice to see some shots of Year 7 lessons and to recognise a face who I've been helping with Oxford application in the past couple of months. So it seems a little bit dated to me, but I think the ideas are still relevant.
Dan, it doesn't seem to be playing just yet.
It's not playing at all?
No.
Okay, now. I need to go to a new share, don't I? There we go. Can you see it at the moment?
Yes.
Great, okay, all right, we'll try that again. Sorry about that.
No problem. There's not any sound, sorry.
You have to share your computer audio with us.
When you shared your screen, did you tick the little box at the bottom left?
Okay, here we go. There we go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
And share computer sound. Okay, right, third time lucky. Yeah? Okay.
Academic literacy does matter, and because it gives pupils the power to be heard and to be listened to and to gain the respect of their listeners.
We still elect and choose our leaders through who sounds the best, who's the most charismatic, who can convey what they want to do with the country in the most convincing manner. So it is a barrier to people who don't know how to use that register.
Academic literacy and academic voice is a skill that can be learned. It gives young people such as myself the chance to really, really express myself despite class, despite gender.
It's vital that we equip our students with those skills, because in terms of them accessing Russell Group and trying to get students into Oxford and Cambridge and after Mulberry, it's about life chances.
It's the job of every teacher, because at the moment every single subject has got some sort of written or speaking form to it that requires development in the students.
In essence, the Fetch Me a Pen project is about giving teachers the confidence, skills and a safe place to explore what literacy means in their subject, and then working together to create appropriate resources for their students.
At Mulberry, certainly we are now all seen as responsible for improving literacy and academic writing. How that has happened is through the CPD programme and it becoming much more of a whole school approach. Teachers who may have previously lacked confidence or felt that they may not have been taught it themselves in their own education, once they were given the tools to teach the students, their own confidence grows. So it is different and it is exciting and it is working.
Mulberry School for Girls is situated in the borough of Tower Hamlets, and although we're a stone's throw away from the city and all the wealth that comes with it, we actually do serve the poorest ward in the poorest borough of London.
We have lots of very able students in our sixth form, but sometimes their grades may not reflect that because the academic voice is not there for them to actually get across clearly what they understand.
Imprecise just means it's not completely accurate. It's not incorrect, but it could be written slightly better. So we've changed.
Sometimes when I'm having a conversation with students, the way that we'll talk is not the way that they will write the answer. So their next question is always, Miss, I get that, but how do I put it into words? So they can't make the connection between what they understand and expressing it.
What we're trying to do here with the Fetch Me a Pen project is enable our pupils to compete on an equal footing with the people that do have those much more privileged backgrounds.
Okay, so the use of the simile cracks like a pod may possibly indicate. What's may? Modal verb, possibly. And indicate? Okay.
The focus on academic writing within English has grown significantly over the last 5 years. Beginning with the basic toolkit, we talk very much about the verb being the muscle of a sentence and everything else being built around that.
Okay, so what keywords could we use thinking about? Not just dominant. What's dominant? The alleles. Good. In my subject, the scientific keywords are probably held up most often in the English language as an example of something that's foreign. People feel they have to learn it by rote, so that's one of my focuses, and it is to break down a keyword as much as possible. Words like photosynthesis, which means to create from light. Another example would be thermodynamics, which we take thermo meaning heat, dynamics, energy. So we've actually picked up more words by learning how to break them down. If both parents have the recessive homozygous genotype.
Like most schools, for quite a long time, we used the PEE method, but what we found was that it was holding back the more able, because it gave them very little freedom of individual literary expression. That move away from the kind of generic, adequate PEE responses means that what are still termed as our CD borderline students now are able to articulate responses that are personal and intellectual and original.
A simile is when you combine two things using like
Perfect. Quite quickly, actually, you can see quite a vast difference between Year 7 writing and Year 8, and then by the time they're in the sixth form, it's really very, very high quality. In fact, the kind of quality that we'd expect at undergraduate level.
The A-level results at Year 12 last year, so the AS results, they were the highest results we've ever seen. But I do think there's a definite payoff that will last for much longer than that. If they can develop those skills that give them a strong academic voice, that has a huge impact on their confidence as well. To the extent where it may mean they will look at a certain pathway after Mulberry or after university that they wouldn't have considered otherwise. Everyone wants a society where we can express ourselves without being judged. It's been evident in schools, not just Mulberry, that young people can get to that level without having private education. That feeling that, no, I'm from a school in Tower Hamlets, but that doesn't mean that I'm not able to express myself in a way that's academic. It's really, really liberating, and it's just fulfilling. It's very important to get your voice across.
Okay, so I'm going to just come back to PowerPoint, just having a look at where everybody's from and what they do. So yeah, lots of literacy coordinators, English teachers. Yeah, great. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, so that was from 2015. But as I say, the project was established with some funding from the London Schools Excellence Fund in 2013. Can everybody see my PowerPoint? Yeah.
I'm getting some shaking heads, Dan.
Sorry. Okay. All right. So if I go back to.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Oh, sorry about this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the project was set up and its aims were to, in a cross-curricular fashion, increase teacher knowledge, skills and confidence around academic literacy.
Sorry, it's just on your file page. It's not actually back on the PowerPoint.
Right, I'm really sorry about this. Right, I'm going to stop the share and try and start a new one. Okay, can you see the aims of my program at the moment? Yes, okay, all right. Okay, so the aims of the program were to improve teacher and in turn student knowledge, skills and confidence around academic literacy and writing, to improve teaching methods, to create resources to do that, to embed academic literacy work into schools, departments and curriculums, and to develop really a shared vocabulary, a kind of shared meta-language amongst teachers, and that might be teachers within faculties or across faculties about academic language, grammar and writing. We've heard this word several times already this afternoon, these terms, academic literacy and academic writing. I think when you're beginning a sort of departmental or whole school approach, I think it's worth asking these questions. You know, what do these terms mean? What do they involve? And what do they require? So if anybody would like to offer their own ideas, I mean, we might say basically that academic writing is any kind of writing students do in school, or any kind of non-narrative or non-fiction writing that students do in school. But just unpicking these terms, I wonder if you could put in the chat box what you think they mean, or if anybody would like to speak up, we're happy to hear from you.
We've just had a comment, Dan, in the chat come through from Gail Birch saying use of academic vocabulary, tier 2 and 3. Okay, yeah, so that kind of higher tier vocabulary, how we explicate that for students and how we train them to learn it, absolutely. Any other ideas? Because I think we can kind of take these terms for granted somewhat.
Anything coming up in the chat box, or shall I move on?
We've had Nicole saying being able to articulate their view and ideas in the best way possible. Accuracy in SPG has come up.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, so the kind of raw literacy concerns are, of course, a part of this. I think some of these this is just a capture of a whiteboard from me working with a school in Lambeth in southeast London from a couple of years ago. And a kind of discussion around academic literacy sort of throws up all of these kind of abstract nouns, really. We'd done some work, as you can see on the board, around grammar. We'd got quite technical. I'd proved to them how this sentence, which is the word buffalo repeated 8 times, is actually a sentence. So grammar's part of this, and part of our project is indeed having teachers have a better understanding of grammar. But there's ideas like choice and register, being able to use a particular kind of language, conventions and standard English come into that. We're thinking about genres. We're thinking about immersion in the language of a particular subject. We're thinking about things like fluency, coherence, structure, genre, and so on. And then hopefully we're bearing in mind these things too: enjoyment and motivation and confidence. And we want to build those things into our classes and into our schools. Okay, so just not to take those terms for granted today, I'm going to kind of take you back to the beginning of our journey. The video you've seen, that you eventually saw, spoke a little bit about our school's context. And this is the context in 2010, and it's much the same now. It's a comprehensive, fully inclusive community school. We're quite a unique school within the context of London in that we are quite a monocultural school. About 94% of students in 2010 were of Bangladeshi heritage. The very densely populated part of London, Shadwell, that we are from, that's not entirely typical of the demographic, but it's reflective of a high percentage of Bangladeshi families within the community. We're a little bit more diverse now. We have students from different backgrounds coming in. 92% of people speak English as an additional language. I always feel that's a little misleading because the English language is the language that the vast majority of our pupils have been educated in since they went to school. The Bangladeshi community in East London, generally speaking, are Sylheti, and the Sylheti dialect does not have a written form. So there's kind of obstacles there in terms of students and families who don't speak English, who might not be literate, and not necessarily coming from language-rich backgrounds where there's lots of books at home or lots of discussion, even in English. And I joined the school in 2008, 2009. The school had a brilliant reputation, and the English department had a brilliant reputation. We had, for me, kind of dauntingly high A star to C pass rates. Almost kind of 90% of students were gaining a C grade or better. But as it says here, that pupils weren't necessarily making as many levels of progress as we were making, okay? And I think some aims were to secure, firstly, a larger proportion of highest grades at GCSE. I think the decisions schools make are often kind of driven by attainment, excuse me, and accountability. To increase the level of challenge and expectation at Key Stage 3 writing, and develop and embed higher order literacy as early as possible. Now, initially, that was within English, and I was appointed after my NQT year to this role, which was academic writing coordinator. And I was kind of tasked with initially auditing issues that were presented in pupils' writing, and then going away and researching strategies and trying to draw on academic theory and research, and to then implement some strategies and trial and review them. And I was scratching my head a little bit because, you know, I'd come into teaching as an NQT. Before I trained, I'd done quite a lot of observations of English lessons, and I'd worked as a behaviour support assistant. And it seemed to me that writing in English had been kind of reduced to point evidence explanation. My colleague in the video you've seen referred to this over-reliance on a structure like PEE. And what you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide is me modelling to a year 9 group in my NQT year, and I think that's a pretty lousy example of a model, really. I mean, it's not completely disastrous, but I've kind of misled the students. I've broken up the paragraph on the page into 3 parts. I've used the word. I've started a sentence with this quote, which now we you know, really kind of warn students against and try and get them to express themselves a little bit more fluently. But I feel like PEE was kind of endemic, really, and I use that word very deliberately in English teaching at this point. And myself and our head of department and the English faculty in general felt that we needed to move away from point evidence explanation in order to achieve what we wanted to do. And I think early on in being appointed as academic writing coordinator, which is quite an unusual role, really. I had a kind of a small TLR and was briefed with coming up with some strategy to improve academic writing, which is so important and so central to English. And I went to a workshop, and it was for secondary teachers. If my memory serves me correctly, most of the teachers there were English teachers, but it was held at Queen Mary University, and they have and still have a department called Thinking Writing, and you've got some language specialists in that department who work across faculties, and really their role is to support essay writing for undergraduates. And I think this department was set up because, you know, undergrad tutors were complaining, saying, my students can't write. And we send a lot of students who go to university to Queen Mary. And, you know, we're thinking, well, if students are coming through the British education system and getting the A-levels they need to go on to university, then what's the problem? What are we doing wrong? And can we kind of intervene earlier on with their academic writing? So I'm going to share another presentation in a moment. So I'll stop that share and I'm going to start another one. Okay, can we all see from moving from talk to writing? Yeah, great. Okay, so this is a sort of fetch me a pen workshop we run in order to introduce teachers to a principle of academic writing, and the task at the centre of it is taken with permission from Thinking Writing at Queen Mary University, and I think to think back to my position as somebody who, despite doing an English degree, didn't have a particularly good grasp of the mechanics of language as an NQT English teacher. It was a kind of light bulb moment. I think there were 3 or 4 activities that the professionals at Thinking Writing ran that day, and they really gave me something to work with. And helped me, they sort of demystified for me some of the particulars of academic language. So, as I say, this has been turned into a workshop that we now run with teachers from a variety of subjects. And and really its aims are to understand some of the issues that students encounter as they move from speech to writing, to participate in an activity, and we're going to do that this afternoon, to unpick some of these issues, and then to hopefully reflect on your own department's approach to teaching writing with a grammar focus in mind. So this is the question we pose at the beginning of this workshop, and I'm going to kind of race through these workshops a little bit. And the question is, what issues do your students encounter when moving from talk to writing in your lesson? So if you want to contribute some ideas in the chat box, please do so. And if anybody wants to speak up, they can do that too. Okay, so we've got getting the register right, knowing where to start, absolutely. Starting, yeah. I don't know where or how to start, having the vocabulary, issues to do with fluency, muddled ideas, lack of cohesion, colloquial language. Okay. So these are kind of big and slightly kind of nebulous issues, I think. And, you know, we all talk about things like fluency, having the vocabulary, not knowing where to start. You know, students will say, how do I say that in words? And it's very, very difficult for you to know where to begin with that, I feel. So I think it's sensible to kind of focus on some particular kind of aspects of language, and this is what this workshop and this activity does. I think a couple of people have perhaps touched on some of the issues here. When I share these resources from schools, they generate a lot of discussion and debate. Really, we've got a couple of examples here of, I suppose, schools wanting students to leave the language of the playground or the vernacular, as somebody said in the comments, behind when they come into the classroom. But I think really you're kind of just scratching the surface here. If we're talking about banned words and only speaking when I've been given permission, the tone for me, I think, is slightly punitive. And I think, as I say, we're sort of scratching the surface or missing the point. So we're going to have a look at the activity I've referred to. And this is from Thinking Writing at Queen Mary. They still, I believe, share resources on their website. So, and I think university academic writing centres and websites are a really good place to start. You know, universities have to cater for a range of students, for perhaps international students who aren't familiar with conventions of academic writing in English. And I think, I know that at the beginning of this journey, I drew on a lot of resources and web pages from universities. As I say, Queen Mary's is a good one. The University of Manchester is a good one too, because they've already thought very carefully and have got kind of research and theory informed strategies to address issues in student writing. So having a look at this paragraph, there's a couple of questions. What do you think of this paragraph? Can we be generous about it? Is there anything you like about it? And what problems does it have? So have a read through, and then again, if you'd like to respond to those questions in the chat box, or if anybody wants to have a discussion about it, please do. So anybody, anything good to say about the paragraph as a piece of academic writing? It is slightly decontextualized, you know, it's a sort of snippet from the middle of an essay or a chapter from the In Pursuit of Thinness. Okay, somebody say it's clear and concise. Anybody disagree? Anybody think it's got any problems? Yeah, so it's got some quotations, and we think that quotations are a part of academic writing. There's some evidence, there's some kind of expert opinion, or there's reference to other thinking, and those quotations are embedded. It lacks flow. Okay, I think I'd agree with that. Yeah, there's some kind of comment on the evidence. Yeah. Okay. Lacks flow. Can anybody tell me sort of definitively what this paragraph is about at the moment? Okay, people are, again, I think being quite generous about the paragraph. It's judgments. So it's from In Pursuit of Thinness. It refers to the body. It refers to women's bodies. Okay, somebody said representations of gender. Somebody else has said opinions on physical size. Okay, so two perhaps slightly different interpretations of what the paragraph's about. I think I'd draw your attention to, okay, somebody said I have a problem with too many they. I find that it skips focus. The candidate needs to stop and think some more before moving on. Okay, interesting. I'm just going to pick up on, I think it's Natalia. She said, I have a problem with the too many they. And I sort of tend to agree. Not only they, but other kind of imprecise pronouns like this and it. We've got they and this. Okay, and often they're the kind of subject of the sentence. They occur at the beginning of the sentence. And I think that's why we didn't have many takers when I said, can anybody definitively tell me what this is about? And the two responses thought this paragraph might be about a different thing. So we're going to look at another version now of the paragraph, and I guess this is a kind of spot the difference activity. Normally, if we were all in a room together, I'd have this printed out on paper and you'd be able to kind of really get your teeth into it by annotating, underlining and highlighting and so on. But you're just going to have to imagine that you're able to underline the words and phrases that have been added. And I wonder if anybody would like to tell me what these words and phrases do and how they change the paragraph. Okay, yeah, so somebody said we've now have a clear topic sentence. Okay, yeah, there's more coherence to the argument. If we look at the phrases that have been added, again, we've got some kind of clear phrases. First of all, to initially indicate to the reader exactly what it is you're discussing, current advertising methods. So we're talking about bodies and women's bodies and things that you did pick up on in relation to advertising. We've got kind of clear clausal subjects at the beginning of sentences, I think. So we've got, yeah, better linking between ideas. Yeah, there's a coherence because what this paragraph is about is being referred to now at the beginning of sentences. And then there's a version 3 And this time I've highlighted the words and phrases that have been added, and I wonder if you'd like to suggest how this changes the paragraph even further. What do the kind of blue words and phrases do? Okay, yeah, so somebody said creates links between sentences. Yep, somebody's talking about determiners and connectives. I think in secondary schools we tend to talk about these discourse markers rather as kind of connectives. We've got links between concepts and ideas. Yes, I mean the phrases in blue really are, if we think back to some of the features of academic writing that I spoke about, the purpose of these phrases are to do with fluency and coherence and flow, and fluency and coherence and flow are really important when you're making some kind of argument. So the focus of this workshop really is the red phrases that came in place of pronouns. And I think we've a lot of English teachers here and literacy coordinators, so many of us will know that pronouns are words that take the place of a noun or a noun phrase, and they're very common. Sorry, I've just made the chat box really big. Here we go. They're very common in speech because to avoid repetition, we rely on them. They're a sort of time-saving device. So we've got examples here. The dog was barking. It was annoying. I hear the fire alarm. Did you hear it? I was thinking about a quick snack. Sometimes the pronoun might come first. We've another pronoun there, themselves. And the point here is that they're very common in speech because speakers and listeners usually have an explicit or tacit understanding of the thing or things being spoken about. So they don't have to keep referring to them, and so they use pronouns in their place. And I think because of their frequency and usefulness in speech, school students often use them in their writing instead of signalling in a clearer and more detailed way the thing being described. There's some research here. This is a US academic called Mary Schlepper-Grell. And she is really interested in language and how it's used in schooling. And we've drawn on quite a lot of her work, but she presents the kind of challenges we face here, I think, in a table. So we've got clausal subjects, the kind of thing in a sentence in a school-based academic text, in comparison to clausal subjects in school student speech. So you can imagine text 2 is a kind of conversation between two students at lunchtime talking about somebody in another lesson or one of their friends. And then they move to a geography lesson, or it could be a science lesson. And suddenly they're confronted with this far denser language. So the subjects being used are the formation of sedimentary rocks, one type, water, these sediments, and so on. So, I think if you're to run a little task like this with a group of teachers appreciate knowing what a pronoun is and knowing that pronouns aren't always helpful or useful in academic writing or in a school-based academic text. So we might need to think about expanded noun phrases, and expanded noun phrases is really kind of key stage 2 grammar test parlance. Whatever you think about the key stage 2 grammar test and key stage 2 approaches to writing and fronted adverbials and so on, I think sometimes it's useful to pick up some of the language that has been used with key stage 3 students up until they've come to secondary school. So they do talk about expanded noun phrases, and they're encouraged to use them in their writing. We've got a very kind of everyday, mundane noun phrase here, like the car park. So we've got a determiner. Somebody's mentioned a determiner today. A noun adjunct. So we've got a noun behaving like an adjective. And then really that's the kind of the noun at the heart of the phrase, the park. And, you know, students are encouraged to do these kind of things when developing their descriptive writing at Key Stage 2. So there's some kind of technical information labeling some of these added parts in red. With noun phrases, we can kind of, in theory, infinitely expand them, and it gets to the point where it gets a little bit much, as in the final example. So what does this mean for academic writing? Well, we've noticed in a piece of academic writing the kind of density of the things being named. There's some examples here of some noun phrases for academic writing. So we might take a noun like rhythm from English, and that might be expanded to the poem's rhythm, and then that might be expanded further, the poem's upbeat rhythm created by the writer's use of iambic tetrameter, which is really quite a complex construction. And then another example, winds becomes westerly winds, and then we get westerly winds which are strongest in the Western Hemisphere. And we can kind of see the challenges here in students being able to understand it and use language that's as complex as this. But I think here in each of the expanded noun phrases, more information is given, which allows a student to display greater knowledge, understanding, ability to analyse, evaluate, etc. And examples like these enable students to begin to see language as a series of building blocks that aren't especially complicated in themselves, but can be developed. So there we've got an example of a noun phrase in a sentence. So that's the focus of this kind of workshop. I don't think I would have been able to tell you as an NQT in English. You know, I'm kind of shamefully, like most people in this country, monolingual. I had very little grammar education myself. So part of the process of understanding, you know, the mechanics around academic language was to kind of educate myself, really. And an activity like we've done before is kind of fairly easily replicated, whatever kind of writing you're doing. There's an example here from English. It's a paragraph analysing a poem. This was from the old Key Stage 4 spec, a Robert Browning poem. And all that's been done is the noun phrases within the paragraph are kind of identified, and then they're taken out, okay? And there's an example here, perhaps a close activity, or, you know, it might be that you give students a paragraph like this and ask the same questions I ask you. You know, what do we like about this paragraph? What problems does it have? And I have some examples to show you from other subjects. We've got Key Stage 3 geography. And we've got various nouns that are integral to the understanding, or noun phrases that are important to the understanding of the paragraph. And here we've taken them out. And I think students have a tendency to overuse pronouns in writing because they think, you know, you're their audience, you're their teacher, you're their reader. You've taught them this stuff. You were there, so you know, you know what they're talking about. And I think they don't necessarily understand that good writing does maintain its flow and its fluency by constantly referring to the thing it's talking about. And there's an example here from science. So again, an activity has been created where we've identified the noun phrases, and all of these are at the head of the sentence, at the beginning of the sentence, or most of them are, and then they've been taken out. Okay, and there's another example of a close activity. I think it's worth noting, yes, often we are interested in making language more dense and more complicated when we're teaching students to be good academic writers, but in some cases we want them to be more succinct. And this is a nice example here. We've got a 64-word paragraph and then a 23-word sentence, and they're kind of saying exactly the same thing. I think we need to understand that actually sometimes academic language is more concise. It's about concision. So that's just a kind of a flip side to what I've been talking about. The density of language isn't always desirable. Okay, any questions at the moment? I'm just going to switch back to my main presentation. Okay. So as I say, kind of attending that workshop really gave me sort of food for thought, really gave me somewhere to start in being able to kind of have a look at students' writing and audit it and talk about the things that weren't going so well in students' writing in English. And really our sort of key action from 2010 to 2012 was to sort of demystify for the English department, which was full of people like me who had a sort of shaky or insecure understanding of grammar, who'd become good writers, who had English degrees just through the process of kind of immersion and almost like osmosis, where you read a lot and you wrote a lot and you picked up the conventions along the way. We weren't necessarily able to describe what we were doing with language. So kind of taking stock really in 2012, we were beginning to see some sort of desired effects in more students attaining at the higher end in English. So we'd had kind of just over 10% of students achieving A's or A stars in English language and literature, and then that was slowly growing. We were kind of at the stage where we felt we could have standalone academic writing units. So in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, there's a Year 8 program of study. And the idea was we'd kind of down tools for a couple of weeks, and we'd do a little unit on academic writing. I think these were useful, and there was some improvement in students' writing, but we quickly realized that it needed to become part of everything we did, really. So much of writing in English is essay writing, or a form of it, a version of it, some kind of analytical writing. We really needed to make sure that we were doing it all the time. And I think there's another deconstructed paragraph. I've already shown you a PEE paragraph from my NQT year. And I think what we started doing was to deconstruct paragraphs, or give students structures, or have them understand what goes into a good paragraph in a more useful way and in a more sophisticated way. So here we've got several points made within a paragraph. We've got phrases that put a quotation or a textual reference in context. We felt that was something students weren't doing, quotations themselves. And then we've got the kind of words that unlock kind of meaning and analysis and significance, those analytical verbs, or nominalized noun forms of those verbs. So we started to see an impact, and that was a kind of a trend that continued. The kind of brief that was set for me was to improve the number of A and A star grades in language and literature, and that kind of gradually happened. There's some real highlights in 2014. 42% of students achieved an A or an A star in literature, which we're very proud of, considering the backgrounds of our children. But really, more importantly, I think we were establishing this approach within the department. We were doing a lot more writing. We were giving students better models of writing. We were doing deconstruction of writing, joint construction and independent construction. And I'm going to come back to this sequence or cycle for teaching writing and talk about it in a bit more detail later on, because it's been so useful to us. Okay, and then, as I've said, we were awarded some funding from the London Schools Excellence Fund in 2012 that enabled us to recruit some other schools to make this project a sort of cross-subject project. Now, I'd already started working with teachers from other faculties in working towards demystifying academic writing for them. So we recruited some other schools, 3 other Tower Hamlets schools. We were lucky, we were given quite a significant sum of money to run this project over 2 years. So we were able to pay the people we recruited. We called them lead investigators. There was 1 in each school. Typically they were English or MFL teachers, so teachers with an understanding of language and how it works. During the course of the pilot project, they recruited 1 or 2 teachers to trial some approaches with. They had some kind of professional learning from us at Mulberry. We ran some workshops with them. They went and disseminated it within their own schools with a couple of teachers, and then they were trialing approaches in their lessons and coming back at intervals to reflect on the resources created and the impact made. And these were some kind of key tools, really, that we developed in order to baseline, if you like, student writing, teacher levels of knowledge, skills, confidence, and then the one at top right is from the London Centre for Leadership and Learning, who were at the Institute of Education that's at UCL, who worked with us. We were lucky to have funding to have a consultant work with us whose thing was professional learning, and she was absolutely invaluable in helping us kind of design and run the program. But this is something that they give teachers to reflect on any area of school improvement. Really, it's a very simple table that asks teachers to reflect on the baseline, where we're at the moment, the impact they want to make, and then the strategies they want to put in place in order to achieve that impact. Now, obviously, you can't really fill in that middle column unless you've had some professional learning from people who've already been exploring this. So that's where our expertise and the expertise we developed within our school was useful. And I think really we wanted to move away. I think lots of you will be familiar with David Didow. He's very active on Twitter. He's a sort of teacher and blogger and consultant. And he's quite critical of this kind of approach to literacy across the curriculum. And you might recognize some of these kinds of tasks. You've got writing a tabloid article about the Battle of 1066 in history. You think, well, okay. Write a leaflet explaining triangles to an alien. I'm not really sure what the rationale is that. The mind boggles at the third one. Pretend you're a volcano and write a description of what it feels like to erupt. And I think, as he says, in each case, the teacher is faced with a choice. either commit time to explicitly teaching tabloid journalism, leaflet design, or descriptive writing, or teach the content of their subject. Time spent on writing in ways that are irrelevant to your subject is time you can't spend on teaching your subject. And really what I want is, or what we wanted teachers to kind of aim for was, how do they make their students write like experts in their subject? How do they make them write like mini historians or mini theatre critics or mini scientists? You know, what does academic writing look like in your subject? What are its features? And how do we kind of differentiate those features down to our students as early as Key Stage 3 and Year 7? When we ask teachers who perhaps aren't literacy specialists, you know, what do you do to support literacy in your subject? They always talk about keywords. You know, we teach keywords explicitly, or we give students a glossary of keywords. You know, I think it would be impossible to teach your subject without keywords. Really, keywords are the concepts or the terms, the parts, the agents in whatever you're teaching. And I think sometimes it's useful to kind of teach the words that are going to allow students to put those keywords into sentences. So we've got a focus here. This is a unit on digestion, on some of the verbs, some of the processes, and then some of the circumstances, some of the kind of connectives, or some of the words that are kind of going to join all of these keywords up together. Another thing people always say they use are connectives. We've got kind of banks of connectives adorning the walls of classrooms and corridors across the country. And I think sometimes we don't really think about how we intelligently have students use these kind of discourse or structural markers. There's some terrible advice here. This comes, I can criticize it because it comes from a sixth form classroom in my own school a few years ago, but it was a little piece of A4 tacked to the notice board. And it says here, remember to use a variety of connectives to make your paragraph interesting. And I think connectives aren't particularly interesting. That's not their sort of function. Their function is an organizational or structural one. You know, they're linking words and phrases. I think the advice here is encouraging students to kind of use them for the sake of it to sort of sound more academic. And as I say, it's having teachers kind of understand this process of modeling writing, of supporting writing, of having students practice lots and lots of writing. At the outset, really explaining writing is all about asking questions like, why are we doing this? Why is this a sensible piece of writing to do? Why would a scientist do this? You know, it might be, why do you need to do it for your exam? But really it's thinking about the purpose of the writing before you set out to write. And with lots of diagrams to do with education like this one, you know, things don't often neatly follow this structure. I think modelling and scaffolding and practicing and explaining and so on kind of take place in a more sort of piecemeal way. But I think we need to be doing all of these things in most of our subjects in order to have students gain kind of mastery. Another workshop, I'm just mindful of time. We're going to have a look at another sort of workshop now. And this is related to that cycle for teaching or supporting writing. So just bear with me one moment, please. Okay, and this one's called Slow Writing and Reflective Editing, Scaffolding Language and Scaffolding Learning. And as I say, we'll kind of quickly go through this workshop so we leave some time for questions at the end of the session. But again, this idea is comes from the guy I've referenced not so long ago, David Didow, who blogged about slow writing and having students do it in his lessons. But really, I think this is something teachers have been doing for a long time. So the purpose of this workshop that you run with teachers is to kind of have a look at what slow writing means, how it can work with academic writing, how we operate slow writing in the classroom as a means of providing scaffolding to move students forward towards independent construction. So there's this cycle again. There are lots of versions of this cycle. This one was kind of designed, if you like, by somebody called Joan Rothery in the 1980s. Rothery is an Australian who comes from a kind of school of linguists who are very interested in education called the Sydney School. And really they're very interested in a model of language called systemic functional linguistics, which is very, very complicated. It's founded by a guy called M.A.K. Halliday, but it centers on language as always having some kind of social purpose, and therefore language always kind of belonging to a particular genre in relation to that purpose. And I think it's a kind of sensible approach to take in order to appreciate kind of how the language of schooling demands that students switch from many, many different registers. It's very complex. They go from lesson to lesson and they're forced to switching to a different register, and that register needs to be made explicit and clear to them. Particularly students from backgrounds that aren't necessarily language rich. I think their teachers need to have this kind of cycle for writing in mind. I quite like this version of the cycle. So we've got some elaboration about what these kind of things mean. So if we look at one of them, modeling and deconstruction, identifying the required genre and register expected by the task, examining model text and asking questions to identify how and why they're structured the way they are, making explicit or visible the predictable language patterns of the focus text. So I've shown you a deconstructed paragraph with some of its language patterns made clear or deconstructed. So I was talking about things like point, phrase for introducing quotation, analytical verb, analytical language, quotation itself, and so on. So that was one example of that. And developing a shared meta-language amongst pupils and amongst teachers within subject areas. And that might be one that draws heavily on grammatical terminology, or it might not be. I think you can't be wedded to one approach. You need to find an approach that works for yourself and your colleagues. So this is David Didow's kind of conception of slow writing. He used it with a GCSE class, a kind of CD borderline class, to have them be a little bit more imaginative in their writing, encourage them to include some elements in their writing that they wouldn't habitually include. And there used to be a little kind of sentence generator online. This screenshot is taken from it. So you'd click on a box and it would generate a sentence prompt kind of at random. And the only problem was that sometimes the sentence prompt didn't really fit the kind of writing you wanted the students to do. But what he found was that it forced them to make decisions. It's a very artificial way of getting students to write, but it forced them to make decisions they wouldn't necessarily make if they would just set a task that was completely unscaffolded. There's some examples here of one of my classes using this a couple of years ago, and this was a year 9 class. And I've kind of numbered the sentences here. I think we've probably got just about enough time to do this. Can anybody suggest to me what kind of prompt or restriction on their writing, or sometimes you'll tell students they must include this in their writing, they've been given for sentence 1, and 2 of them have gone with shivering here. We've got shivering as the deceiving sun emits light but no warmth. Somebody else has gone, ooh, sorry, shivering involuntarily, I spared a glance at the world that lay beyond. And then somebody's gone with a more complex sentence. Staring blankly at the rusty iron bars, I sat very still, trying to figure out a way to escape this suffocating prison cell. Anybody suggest in the chat box what prompt they've been given to begin that sentence? So they were told to begin the sentence with a participle verb, an ing verb, and that's quite a nice one to do in creative writing because it forces a particular sentence construction. So, you know, shivering involuntarily, comma, you then introduce an I. Somebody's, the example B has got staring blankly at the rusty iron bars, I sat very still, comma, and so on. So it forces a particular sentence construction that students wouldn't use. If we have a look at sentence 3, we've got frantically, suddenly, mirthlessly. So they've been told to begin the sentence with an ly adverb. If we look at sentence 5, we've got then I remember my sister. The guard walked past me. And then C, the kind of the slightly more sort of abstract or metaphorical, death scythe brushed my neck. And the sentence command there was you must begin, or you must write a sentence with just 5 words, with 5 words only. So it works. I think it's useful for creative writing, for sort of fictional writing. But I think it's really useful in scaffolding students' writing for analytical writing too. There's an example here, and this was kind of done live within the lesson. And I think slow writing is exactly what it claims to be. It's slow. So you might, you know, have a period of lesson time, and your objective is for everybody to write a paragraph. And what you're doing at each stage is having students share their writing. You're kind of critiquing it and praising it and thinking about how it might be improved before moving on to the next sentence and saying, okay, this was from the spoken language study. So this is a bit of a relic. Some colleagues might remember the English controlled assessment into spoken language, which was great. And again, it's talking students sentence by sentence, kind of coaching them through the writing at that level. And I think you'll have access to these presentations if we've got any history teachers here. There's a history teacher blogger who's found it useful too. He does it in quite a complex way, putting various kind of stipulations, limitations, sentence starters out there for students. There's some rules here. I like the first rule where he encourages students to double space the writing so it can be redrafted. Sometimes it's sensible to kind of begin with a mentor text. So look at a good example of writing, identify its component parts, and then kind of emulate that. So here's an example from history. I think using students' own writing is so powerful. Whenever you speak to science teachers, they feel anxious about the writing demands of the 6-mark question, which demands a lot from students in a kind of short space on an exam script. So here's an example of looking at some 6-mark answers to a question about osmosis. And then some work here on students kind of deconstructing the writing themselves, really thinking about what the language is doing, and then coming up with some useful sentence starters as a class, and perhaps creating a class writing frame. So I think this is you know, if in slow writing you are given students prompts for writing, I think when students are mastering writing, they might be able to generate the prompts themselves. And I think, just so we've got some time for any questions, I'll talk you quickly through this. So I think this process works when editing writing too. This is some work I did with a history teacher when GCSE coursework was still a thing a few years ago. And this is about the Vietnam War. Students were answering a question along the lines of why did the American army find it so difficult to defeat the Viet Cong in Vietnam, in South Vietnam. And what myself and the history teacher did, so I was working closely with this history teacher in order to help her better understand the language demands of this piece of work and the language of her own subject, really. We kind of created a paragraph for use in lesson that typified issues with student writing. So I don't think it's wise to use an example of student writing that isn't very good from the class, but you might kind of create a composite of issues that are in place within that class. And there are some of the issues. You know, a huge issue, as I've already touched on today, is assuming too much knowledge on the part of the reader. There's some other technical issues like proper nouns, comma splices, imprecise pronouns that we've spoken about. I think at the heart of this paragraph, there's issues around explicitness, being clear about the what, the who, the why, and the when. Some issues for connectives and not having a point. Somebody mentioned a clear topic sentence earlier on. So really, this was a resource put together, and this was about kind of joint construction of writing and modelling of writing, but it was sort of talking students through the paragraph sentence by sentence. So the first step is to correct the proper nouns, and already it kind of looks like a more legitimate paragraph. It looks a bit more convincing. And then really identifying the would-be sentences, if you like, within the paragraph. So the second task is improve the beginning up to find. There should be a full stop here, not a comma splice. So we're kind of concerned with working on this bit of the text, which reads, Americans had Hershey's on their journey and left rubbish on the floor for them to find. Okay, now this is quite interesting, and it told me something. I learned something from it, but it's not very good as a piece of academic writing because it begs questions like this to do with kind of vagueness. We've got a pronoun, them. So we might kind of answer that question in an edited version of the paragraph, or rubbish from what? And it might be improved to look something like this. American soldiers had Hershey's chocolate bars as part of their rations while fighting, and they often left their wrappers on the ground for the Viet Cong to find. And then the task is create another sentence up to smell. So at the moment we've got their shoes made loud noises while they were walking, and they also used deodorant that left the smell. And again, it's begging questions like the ones here. So as you can see, there's space here on an interactive whiteboard to work on an improved sentence together, or students might do it in pairs or groups or individually. So we've got a connective at the head of this sentence. and we've got those questions answered. Okay, and then finally, sum up using the last sentence here. So is a little weak. What might be a more powerful summing up connective? And then some more questions. So the Viet Cong always found them, or did they really always find them? Frustrated and angry, why? Can you elaborate on that? And then a final step, we've got a nice concluding sentence here, was to have a topic sentence. And again, some more questions, just kind of sort of eliciting the ideas out of students. And then there's a kind of model topic sentence. So we've moved from something like this to something like that, but I think a teacher needs to really show students how they begin to do that. So, you know, at the heart of everything we do is not necessarily saying, here's what good language and good writing and good literacy in your subject looks like. That's for you to decide, but you need to go on a kind of journey, a process, if you like, along this writing cycle so that you're confident in being able to do that. So really just some kind of snippets and snapshots of the kind of work that we do. I think I wanted to talk to you about the cycle for teaching writing because it's so central to what we do, and to also show you an activity that we use with teachers in order to help them begin to make sense of writing, and to kind of demystify it. There's some, you know, testament to the kind of ongoing sort of success and value in this, with the fact that we enjoy consistently high results, particularly at the higher end of attainment. We're very pleased with the number of 9 to 7 or A* and A grades we get in essay-based subjects. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we do work with other schools. We've worked with schools nationally, in Somerset as part of the Somerset Challenge. We work with schools on a consultancy basis within London, within our borough, but you know, we are mindful that individual teachers and departments need to be constantly reflecting on their classroom or departmental approach to teaching writing. And then while people are thinking of any questions they would like to ask me, we have about 5 minutes to go. There are some key texts here that have been important to us. We've kind of got a growing library of texts that teachers can refer to on academic literacy and writing. I've referred to 1 or 2 of them today. The kind of 3 over here on the right-hand side are just brilliant texts for anybody with an interest in writing and anybody with a responsibility for it to read. They're not necessarily about practical approaches for improving the writing of secondary school students. You know, they're just brilliant food for thought, but the others are all kind of practical approaches and principles and strategies you might use in a secondary school context. So any questions about anything I've spoken about today, I would welcome.
Yes, hi Dan, it's Natalia.
Hello.
I'd like to ask you, are we going to receive this PowerPoint? I know you mentioned it, but are we going to receive it as an email, or what's going to be the situation with this?
I can answer that for you, Dan. I will, at the end of this session or tomorrow morning, I will send a email with the PowerPoint and a link to our feedback form. So you'll get a copy, and we'd be really grateful if you could also fill in our feedback form.
Okay, thank you. I have a very basic question also. I know there are many different opinions about it. So I tend with, especially with my year sevens, have sentence starters on the board, which they are always referring back to the question. Would you have a sentence starters on the board if there is a task or not? I do not teach English, I teach PRE, philosophy, religion and ethics. Or you are trying to stay very much away from sentence starters and
No, absolutely. I think they're so incredibly useful. As I mentioned to Rebecca the other day, I have a slightly tricky situation at the moment because my daughter, who is in year one, is isolating. So that's why I'm delivering this session from my kitchen. And I look at the approach that her school's taking as a beginner writer. She's given little sentence starters as a connectives to organise her weekend news, and it really gives structure and kind of fluency to her writing. And I think, we ought to be using that up to a point. If students are writing about a new text or doing a different kind of writing, I don't see why you wouldn't give them sentence starters as a way of organising their writing. I think, the question is, where do we develop the independence and where do we take them away?
yeah.
And I think, I've had teachers say to me before, well, for some of my students, I'm never going to take them away because I think they need them right up until when they do a piece of high stakes writing or a piece of work or an exam. Other students might not need them or might deviate from them, but I think, they're really valuable.
Yeah, I do just leave them on the board and I say, you can use the sentence starters if you wish, but if you want to start differently, then feel free to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Anything in the chat? If anybody does have any questions or is interested in working with us or finding out a bit more about the Fetch Me a Pen project, there are some links here on the final slide of the presentation Rebecca's going to send out. There's my email address. There's our website that has a few more videos giving insights into these different approaches. There's a TES page that has some resources on it. Generally speaking, they're kind of English-based resources, but some of them are to sort of support a whole school understanding of an area of language and literacy. But you are more than welcome to get in touch if you want to find out more.
Thank you, Dan, so much. That was brilliant. I'm sure everyone agrees. Thank you for presenting and for all your ideas. And as I said, I will be in touch to send round the slides. We've also recorded the session, so it'll be up on our website soon. So if you want to re-watch any of it or share with colleagues, then I'll let you know when it's on our website. But from all of us at Challenge Partners, thank you very much. We've had some lovely comments saying thank you in the chat to you as well, Dan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.